The natives call her Sagarmatha, goddess of the sky. She stretches 29,052 feet into the air. To put that in perspective, think of the Washington Monument and stack it on top of itself 52 times. That height was first recorded in 1856 by a British surveying team out of India under the direction of Sir George Everest. Interesting fact, Sir George never saw the mountain that currently bears his name. Between 1920 and 1952, 7 expeditions attempted to reach the summit of Everest. 7 expeditions failed. To this day, less than 30% of the people that attempt to reach the summit of Everest ever make it. Less than 30%. A tragic fact is, out of every 10 who attempt to reach the summit, 2 die trying. On May 29th, 1953, something extraordinary happened. For the first time in the history of our planet, 2 men stood on the highest point on Earth. Some of you know the story. Tenzing Norgay and Edmund Hillary. During a press conference shortly after the accomplishment, Hillary was asked the question, what makes you so extraordinary that you could be the first man to reach the top of Everest? And Hillary said something I thought was pretty profound. He said, people do not decide to become extraordinary. Rather, they decide to accomplish extraordinary things. As Nomi said, informed you, I'm a research professor at the University of Georgia. Okay. And now I know you just had a cocktail hour and a nice dinner, and now you're going to hear a university professor. Well, let me remind you, Indiana Jones was a university professor. And in the years that we've been studying expertise, almost 2 decades now, one of the conclusions that we continually find, and other people who also study the development of experts find the same thing. You didn't bring any inherent qualities into this world that could predict your performance, your ability to achieve. Let me give you an example. We often think people who accomplish extraordinary things are very intelligent. I'm going to guess everyone in this room knows somebody that's much more intelligent than they are, but when you look at what they accomplish, you're kind of surprised that they're underperformers. And on the other hand, there's people that you are probably profoundly more intelligent, and their accomplishments are extraordinary. So intelligence isn't necessarily a predictor of how successful anyone can be. No inherent qualities really can tell us who the top performers are going to be, who is going to accomplish the extraordinary things. So in our research, what we've tried to do is identify what it is that people who accomplish extraordinary things have in common. And as I was talking with Andy and Nomi about what might be a good messages for you, we talked about things that, and this is my hope for you right now, is that something I say today, you can take back tomorrow and apply immediately. Because what we know is people who accomplish extraordinary things do it by the knowledge they have and the skills they possess, nothing they inherently brought into the earth. So what we've decided to do, or I decided to do, is select 4 things that I'd like to talk about this evening. The first is how you see the world. People who accomplish extraordinary things might see the world a little bit differently. And our research, you're going to have fun with this, our research has kind of identified some of those factors. Next, decision making. Now, as project managers, do you make a lot of decisions in a day? Absolutely. And does your livelihood depend on the quality of your decisions? Absolutely. And so what I'm going to share with you is some of the research on how to make your decisions a little more efficient and a lot more effective. Third point I'd like to talk about is developing routines. Now, we often think routines are just kind of ho-hum sort of thing. But what we have found is that routines are critical to people's success. And we'll have a little fun with that one too. And the final point I want to make has to do with, again, achieving the extraordinary. To do the ordinary, you just have to do what you've always done before. To achieve the extraordinary, you have to do things a little differently. And that requires innovative thinking. And so I'll share that with you, and that's where we'll bring this to a close. Now, look at this slide. You do not have to know anything about sport or tennis to get the point I want to make here. This comes from a study we did in tennis, and I thought of to make the point for you. What we did is we took 27 of the top tennis coaches in the world. They had all been identified as Coach of the Year by the International Professional Tennis Registry. So they were from all over the world. We had 27 of them. We also had 25 novice coaches. These are people who actually were coaching, but they had been coaching for 2 years or less. They've been in tennis a long time. And what we did is, part of the protocol is we showed them a series of slides like you're looking at right now. Take a look at that for just a minute. And then we turned it off after 15 seconds. I know that's already been up there for almost a minute. And then we asked them to write down everything you remember. Now, I'm not going to ask you to write anything right now, but what I'd like you to do is at your table, talk about what you remember from the slide. What did you see? Go ahead. I like the energy of this group. Are you interested to see what the novices and the experts saw? Okay. I know it's a little hard for you to read, but the novices are on the left-hand side and the experts are on the lower right-hand side. University setting, yep. Yeah, the novices saw things like a car, a tiger's paw. This slide was taken at Clemson University. The person was wearing a white uniform and a hat. There was buildings behind. The experts, they saw that the person had their right hand back for balance. They noticed the body position and that the wrist was dropped. So what's the difference between the novices and the experts? Go ahead, what do you see? Discuss that at your table, then I'll tell you what we saw. I've got a question for you. Did anybody at the table realize that if you look at the number of factors, the little boxes, the number of factors, the quantity of information is almost the same? We often hear experts see more. No, they don't. They see differently. So it doesn't mean somebody who's an expert has any more brain power or a mega memory of some kind. It's what they focus on. And here's what we found. 3 things in particular, and I think it applies very much to your work as a project manager. All right? First is performance factors. They didn't see the white hat or the uniform or the buildings or the cars. They saw the balance. As Marcus said, they saw the position of the foot that would affect where the ball was going to go. So they first identified the factors that influence the performance of the player. And think about your work. When you have a project before you, most of you that are very skilled could probably put your finger on the 1, 2, 3, or 4 things that are most important to bringing this project home. Factors. And you focus on those very tightly. Novices, and many of you work with people who don't have the skill or the level that you have, they're all over the place. So performance factors first. You see that. Okay? Next, what is under your control? Because what is not under your control, you give that up. Any emotional or intellectual energy you give to things you cannot control is a waste. Forget it. Focus on the things that are under your control, which means the things you can change, which is the third point. So when you're in a project, and I know this happens all the time, things never go the way they planned, right? I work with sport coaches. Our largest population of subjects have been mostly coaches at the elite level, professional coaches, Olympic level coaches, and Division I college football coaches. And a game never goes as planned, ever. And they're ready for it, right? Because they focus on the things that are going to influence the performance, the things they can control. For example, they can't control how the other team plays, right? But they can control how their team plays, so they focus on that. They can't control who wins the game. How many of you saw the Masters? Okay, Bubba Watson, University of Georgia graduate. Very interesting character. Let me just say that and move on, all right? Focuses on the things he can control while he's playing. He can control his shot. He can't control what the other player does. And then finally, what can you change? And again, if you look at your projects as you're going through and focus on those three factors, without question, you will be far more efficient in bringing that project home on time and under budget. And isn't that most of the goals that we have? Yeah. All right. This afternoon, we sent an artist to Andy Walker's office, and we asked him to do a rendering. We said, we'd like you to capture how Andy makes decisions. All right, moving on. How should Andy be making decisions? By the way, I did ask Andy if it was all right if I used his name, and he was gracious enough to let me do that. Thank you, Andy. All right. In our research, and by the way, there's many, and most of you are familiar with this, many theories of decisions, and most of them are very good, and there's lots of research on how to make appropriate decisions. So I'm going to share with you what research we've done and other people who do similar types of work on decision making. And we found that there's really two kinds of decision makers, or two types of decisions, I should say. One is what we call forward thinking, and the other is called backward thinking. And let me tell you where I got these two concepts. Anybody in here a Sherlock Holmes fan? Oh, I know. Oh, great. You're my peeps. I love Sherlock Holmes. I love to read Sherlock Holmes. I'm not so crazy about the new movies. They're okay. But you read Sherlock Holmes, and he talks about the difference between he and his counterpart detective, Lestrade from Scotland Yard, who's relatively inefficient. And one day, Holmes was explaining how he thinks versus Lestrade. And Holmes called his thinking forward thinking. And that's where I got the idea, because I really saw it in expert decision makers. And really the difference is the forward thinkers look for solutions. The backward thinkers look for justifications. And let me share with you an example I'm sure we've all had, an experience we've all had. Okay, the warmer weather is coming soon, we hope, all right? At least that's the theory. So we walk into a retail store. You pick the store. Right? And we see a jacket. And we immediately say, I got to have that. Right? We've already made the decision. I got to have it. Right? So now you start to justify all the reasons you need that jacket. Right? Warmer weather's coming up. I don't have a jacket like that. Right? I'm going to go to a ball game, and that jacket would look perfect. It'll match other things that I have. Right? It's new and it's stylish. I like it. It fits really well. So you buy it. You bring it home. And you realize it really wasn't such a good deal. You really don't like the jacket after all. Right? And if you're a guy, you're going to stick it in your closet and never look at it again. If you're a woman, you're probably going to take it back and exchange it and make a better decision the next time around. Now, this is a little scary, all right? Do we have any people that do work in the medical field? Oh, good. Oh, a couple people, all right. All right, this was a study done with X-ray technicians. Right? Novice, if you will, people with less than 5 years experience, and expert X-ray technicians. And they found with the novice X-ray technicians, these are people who potentially are looking at your X-ray. They use a lot of backward thinking. They spot something, usually the biggest thing or the brightest thing, and that's the cause. And then they work backwards looking for other evidence to suggest this is the way it should be. This is what we should attack. But the experts don't. The experts use forward decision making. Let me put the schematic up and just take a quick look at it, and then I'll explain it to you. By the way, it's been supported by our research and research out of the University of Pittsburgh in particular. I don't know if you can read it, but the first step is define the challenge, define the problem. I know that sounds kind of simplistic, but you know, in doing the research on the differences between great decision makers and poor decision makers, ultimately the great decision makers take less time. But in the first step, the great decision makers take more time. Because they know if they don't get the problem right, they have no hope of ever getting the solution right. So they spend more time analyzing really what is the problem. What are we trying to solve here? What's the purpose? What are our goals? And then once they got that, they move to the next step, which is to identify the things that are causing the problem. Not the symptoms, but the causes. Most of you deal with teams, right? You work with people? Just shake your head if you're still awake. Oh, good. All right. Yeah, you work with teams. All right. Let's say you have somebody that's on one of your teams, or maybe the team that you're working with, and they've been great all along for the past 2-3 months. All right? Very happy, very willing to go the extra mile. And all of a sudden you start to notice, not so much anymore. All right? They're kind of crabby, a little cranky. They want to go home. They don't really finish their duties like they used to. And so if you're a backward decision maker, you look at that and you say, listen, you got to step it up a little bit. You got to be a better team player. Well, what you're doing is attacking the symptoms. What a really good decision maker would do is say, that's not how you were last week, last month. Is there something wrong? And most of you have done this before, so you know potentially, yeah. You know, I've got a loved one who's chronically ill that I just discovered, or financial hardships have hit them, or some other major issue. Maybe something happened on the team. But until you know what the factors are that are causing the problem, again, you have no way of identifying what the problem really is. And I know you all work with people that just go rapid decisions and off they go to the races without really thinking about what it is that it takes. And most of you have also had the privilege of working with people who are good decision makers that don't mind stepping back a little bit and saying, wait a minute, let's find out what's really going on here. Right? Which means that you can go to the next solution, or the next step, sorry. All right. And this, again, is a major difference between good decision makers and poor decision makers. Construct solutions. Notice that's a plural, solutions. Most people are good at saying, okay, here's our problem, here's what's causing it, here's our solution, let's implement it. No, the really good decision makers say, okay, yeah, that's solution A, and you know what? It's probably a good solution. But let's see if we can circle the wagons a little bit, make another decision or solution. Let's come up with solution B that might even be better than solution A. And let's not stop there. Let's come up with one more, solution C. Because now what you have allows you to do the last step, and that's evaluate, given these circumstances and these factors, what's the best looking solution we have in front of us? And it may not be A, it may be B. So let's go with B. And here's the real nugget in it. What if B doesn't work? Yeah, you can go to A. Novices can't go anywhere. They've got, basically, they started with A, and that's as far as they'll go. And they'll ride that solution into the ground. All right? You've all seen it. I know that. So it allows you to have what we call contingencies. So think just a minute, if you will, about a major decision. And again, you can't do this with every decision, like, you know, what am I going to wear for socks tomorrow morning? That's not appropriate for this. But major decisions that you've had in your business, can you think of one that you've had in, let's say, the last 2 or 3 weeks, and analyze it based on that? And just take a minute at your table and share that if you don't mind. A major decision. And talk through, did you do those steps? Or what steps could you have taken to make it better? Go ahead. Yeah, I know, that's a big one, isn't it? Now, if that decision followed most of those steps fairly closely, if that decision followed most of those steps, I'm guessing you're pretty satisfied with the results of that. If you skipped one of those steps or kind of shortcutted one of those steps, probably not going to be that good. That's just what we know about decision making. And sometimes, yes, we're human. Sometimes we don't make good decisions. But the next time you have an important decision to make, think about those steps. I would strongly encourage you, particularly the first step, make sure you got that problem right. And then the third step, don't just start to act because you have a solution. Play with it. Make sure you got a good solution and you have backup plans. All right. This comes from a study, it has to do with decision making, that looked at triathletes. Again, I do a lot of work in sport. Right? Now that might look a little confusing to you, so let me help you out here. If you look at the bottom line, you'll see passive, active, and proactive. All right? Those are thoughts. All right? Passive thoughts would be like, for example, you're sitting in this room and you notice things like, that's a beautiful chandelier. All right? Or I notice Marcus looks really sharp with those suspenders and that tie. All right? That's a fairly passive thought because it really doesn't have anything to do with your purpose being here. Now, if you look and saw Kendall sitting there and say, you know, Kendall just had an interesting project that I'd like to talk to him about. That's an active thought. All right? He's here, you're here, and there's something you've got in presence. All right? Or there's some people at your table you don't know. So actively, maybe I should find out what he or she does. All right? That's an active thought. For the athletes who are in the triathlon, they would think things like, what's my heart rate going? Because if it's going too fast, I'm not going to be able to finish the race. What's my mileage currently? What's the weather like? Is it starting to get too hot? If it is, I've got to slow down a little bit. Or is it temperature going to stay cool? I can speed up a little bit. So they're always monitoring the current events that are going to impact the project. And you do that too, all the time. That's probably where you spend most of your day, is monitoring those things that are going to influence the project. Those are active thoughts. Now let's just start with those two. If you notice passive thoughts, over here we have front, middle, and back. That's the pack. Right? Think about a race. We have the front of the pack, we have the middle of the pack, and we have the back of the pack. In Georgia, we call the back of the pack the University of Florida. You know, someday I fear I'm going to be in Gainesville and make that comment. All right. If you notice, this line here, the one that peaks the highest, almost no passive thoughts. When the people who are in the front of the pack are in the race, they're either on active thoughts, and I haven't gotten to the proactive thoughts, and I will. All right, they are either active thoughts or proactive thoughts. You look at the middle of the packers, they spend a little less than half their time, maybe about 35% of their time, on passive thoughts. Gee, it's a nice day. All right? That's a very good-looking person running by me. All right? All right. Now you look at the back of the packers, all right, and they spend almost half their time in these passive thoughts, basically daydreaming, all right, not really aware of what's going on. Now, look at the active thoughts. The front of the packers are thinking about that all the time, constantly monitoring the situation. This is what gives your job such a challenge, isn't it? You're constantly doing that. Where are we? And what do we need to do? The what do we need to do is the proactive. And you notice the back of the packers hardly ever have a proactive thought. That's the thought about what's happening now and how can I use it to affect the future. That's proactive. And when you're on a project and you look at what's going on now and you say, how can I use these people next week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks from now that is really going to make a difference in this project? What do I need to do today that will influence the future? For people who are competing in triathletes, it's like, okay, here's my resting heart rate. All right, it's not too bad. I know I'm going to have enough energy when there's only a mile left in the race to really kick it in. That's a proactive thought. Okay? And again, you notice the biggest proportion is the thinking is the front of the packers think strategically. And as a project manager, when you do that, when you're looking into the future, thinking about how you could use today, that is one way to turn the ordinary into the extraordinary. Because the future is going to happen. How much control you have over it depends on how you think about it. All right, so extraordinary decisions are anchored in factors that make a difference. towards achieving goals. And I know you've all been on projects that have just sunk because people took their eye off the ball. They took their eye off the goals. They started to get mired in minor things. No, extraordinary achievers focus on what is most important, and they keep their eyes on it. They focus on a thorough, permanent solution. They're not just trying to get through the day and solve the problem right now. I know many of you are parents in here. Oftentimes you just want the kids to stop screaming, so you do whatever it does to make them stop screaming now, right? If they're screaming in another hour, well, then you'll deal with it in an hour. Right? But that's not a thorough, permanent solution. All right? Most of us in our professional lives, we have to think about something that's going to have a long-term effect. And then finally, supported with contingency plans. And again, I feel like I'm preaching to the choir. As project managers, if you don't have contingency plans, you know you're in trouble. And that's why, again, going back to that decision making, those 4 steps, that third one, before you launch anything, make sure you have 2 or 3 really good plans to go. Because extraordinary decisions are very flexible and they're very proactive, they're future oriented. And here's the thing that really shocked us when we studied great coaches and average coaches. And again, I'm talking at the highest level, professional, Olympic level coaches, and Division I college coaches. All right. The initial plan didn't work. They were willing to change immediately. Some of you are familiar with the football coach, Bobby Bowden, former football coach, Florida State University. Bobby's cooperated in more of our research studies than any single person. In fact, Bobby and I sometimes talk together. We'll go to coaching conferences. He's a wonderful human being. And one time I was interviewing him after he had played, and I won't go deep into the sport metaphors here, but he was playing his son's team the time that Tommy was coaching at Clemson University. At the time, Bobby at Florida State was ranked number 1. So they went up to Clemson to play, and they lost. And I was supposed to interview Bobby on Monday, and I thought, there's no way he's going to want to talk to me. He says, no, come on in. We're glad to talk to you. And so I said, well, tell me about the game. And he said, you know, we didn't have enough planning done. I said, what do you mean you didn't have enough planning? He said, when they threw something at us that we didn't recognize, we couldn't make the change. I had nowhere to go. And so he said, so we talked a little bit about his planning. He says, you know, plans go out the window as soon as the ball goes up in the air, which means a kickoff, the start of the game. So he plans for preparation. Think about that. He planned for preparation, not to script anything. It's not going to go like a Hollywood play. So what you're doing is you're preparing for the events that occur. And that's what those decisions are about. Okay. How many of you have ever heard this? 2 of you. No. Who was the one, Andy or Nomi? Yeah, Andy said this. Because I said, okay, what's one of the biggest issues these people are facing in 2014? And he said, almost all of them are always asked, can you do more with less? Well, I'll tell you what the research says. All right. Yeah. I was doing a program for UPS. And one of the people in the back of the room goes, that looks like FedEx. You know, the truth is, you can't do more with less. It's just not possible. The research on multitasking shows unless it's a very mundane activity, like, for example, you're baking a cake and having a conversation with somebody in the room, you can do that. You know, but anything more sophisticated than that, you really can't do all that much. You can't do more with less. You know, most of you are familiar with Charles Darwin, and most people say that what Darwin said was, it's survival of the fittest. But if you actually read the book, Voyage of the Beagle, that's not what he said. This is what he wrote. He wrote, it's not the strongest of the species that survive, nor the most intelligent, strongest of the species. Otherwise, the dinosaurs would still be here, right? Nor the most intelligent, okay? Otherwise, Washington would be a lot better run, right? But the one most responsive to change, think about that. That's survival, is the ability to change. All right. Going to give you a little quiz, and if you want to discuss it at the table, that's fine. If you want to keep it to yourself, that's fine too. Of the things that you see up here, give me an approximation, or give yourself an approximation of how much time you spend per day on email and social media. Things like Twitter and LinkedIn and Facebook and that kind of stuff. Reacting to interruptions. You're working on a task and somebody interrupts you. How often does that happen? Must pick up the phone. You ever have the thought, I'd rather be doing something else? You better not be having that thought right now. Things you just can't say no to. Meetings. None of you go to meetings, right? All right, multitasking. I just explained it doesn't work in most activities. Web surfing. And then finally, chatting with colleagues about non-task or non-project related activities or ideas. How much time? Just take a few minutes and look at that. By the way, there's no right answer to this, but you want to know where I got that list? I got it from research out of the University of Chicago School of Business, who studied Fortune 500 companies. And what they were after is, what are the biggest time wasters in corporate America? And this is the list they came up with. Because if you're doing most of those activities, you're probably not making progress on your project. Right? And some of them I know are essential. Once in a while we have to speak on the phone. By the way, I'm just sharing something personal with you. I have a policy that when I'm in my office at the university and the phone rings, I do not answer it. And here's why. Because I write a lot, as some of you got my book, one of them. And if I'm thinking about something and somebody interrupts me, I can't get back to it. I'm just not that smart. So I let it go to voicemail. And then I will return the call either just before I leave the office or if it came in the morning, right after I get back from lunch. All right? So that way I can keep my flow of thought going. All right? So I don't have to must pick up the phone. All right? Something about meetings. Most of you have heard of Queen Elizabeth, right? I think she runs the greatest meetings in the world because she brings everybody into a room that doesn't look a whole lot different than this one. Guess how many chairs are in the room? One. Hers. And the cabinet has to stand. How long do you think they want to be in a meeting if they're standing the entire time? I think it's brilliant. Most of her meetings last 20 minutes, and she's been doing relatively well for a few years in running that country, I think. All right. So when you look at it, think about you need more time. Analyze what you do with your day. For most of us, those fall into the areas of routines. One of the things research has shown is most people go into their office or in front of their computer early in the morning, and they'll log it on, and they'll check their email. Let me submit something to you. You're probably not familiar, or some of you may be, with the concept of biorhythms. All right? There is a thing called biorhythms. Think about this. Are there times in the day, consistently, that you feel like you have more energy? Now, generally, it comes in two waves. Most people, it's usually fairly early in the morning, like between 8 and 10. You have to figure out what yours is. We call those the early birds, and that's why the early bird gets the worm. That most of us, that's the early bird. Now, some of us, it's like 10 to midnight at night, or sometimes midnight to 2 o'clock at night. All right? That seems to be another peak time for people. All right? Thomas Edison, by the way, used to sleep for 4 hours at a time. That was it. Then he'd get up and he'd work, and then he'd go back to sleep. Right? And that's how he became so efficient. So think about your time And what I'd like you to do, because this is critical, what I'd like you to do is everybody go around the table, you tell us the 2 hours in a day that you have the most energy. Go ahead, right now. Yeah. By the way,